Hi, everyone, and welcome to the fifth webinar in our Energy Saving Trust webinar series, It's Time to Decarbonize. Today, we'll be discussing how energy efficiency employee engagement can support your organization's net zero ambitions. My name is Nora, and I work for Energy Saving Trust, along with my colleagues Laura and Lucy, whom you'll be meeting shortly. A bit of housekeeping before we start. The webinar will be recorded. We have a British Sign Language interpreter with us today, Nicole, who will be here for the duration of the webinar. We encourage you to ask questions throughout the webinar by using the questions box, which you'll see on your screen. And we'll be answering these at the end of the webinar in a Q&A section. If you'd like to have a chat with our team and ask questions specifically about your organization, please fill out the form in the chat and we can set up a conversation. At the end of the speaker presentations, there will be 2 short poll questions that will appear on your screen, and your responses will remain completely anonymous. So to give you a bit of background, Energy Saving Trust is an independent organization dedicated to promoting energy efficiency, low carbon transport, and sustainable energy use. We aim to address the climate emergency and deliver the wider benefits of clean energy as we transition to net zero. We empower householders to make better choices, deliver transformative programs for governments, and support businesses with strategy, research, and assurance, enabling everyone to play their part in building a sustainable future. I will now hand over to Lucy to get us started.
Hey everyone, thank you, Nora. So in the first section, I'm just going to set the scene a little bit and talk about why we need to save energy. So I'll focus on 3 areas. So we've got energy prices, sustainability, and net zero. So let's start with what has been big news over the last couple of years, those high energy bills that I'm sure most of us have been experiencing. It's been costing householders and businesses more for heat and electricity than it did just a couple of years ago. Ofgem's energy price cap has changed regularly over the last couple of years, and at the time of this webinar, the average household energy bill for typical usage is around £1,834, and it's a pretty even split between gas and electricity. These aren't quite as high as they were in October 2022, but they're still almost double compared to February 2021. Many of the actions that organisations and households can take towards net zero will also help to reduce the cost of heating and electricity. For example, it costs money to keep the lights on, and much of our electricity still comes from fossil fuels like coal, oil and gas. And these are a finite resource. So using more renewable electricity and low energy lighting will therefore use less fossil fuels and cost less money. So low energy light bulbs are more efficient and last longer. And if you can generate your own electricity, then you're not buying as much from the grid. So really it's a win-win. Next slide, please, Nora. The next part is sustainability. So what do we actually mean by sustainability? Well, the meaning can change depending on the context. Our context at Energy Saving Trust is environmental sustainability. And you might have heard or seen the term sustainable defined as maybe meeting the needs of the present without compromising future generations' ability to meet their needs. Or you might have seen it as the long-term viability of a community, institution, or societal practice, or the capacity to maintain or improve the state and availability of desirable materials or conditions over the long term. Or you might have your own version, but ultimately what all these definitions are trying to capture is an idea of time and impact of the activity on the environment. For something to be sustainable, you will still need to be able to do it or something better than it at a future point without adversely affecting other parts of life. Potentially one way to measure how sustainable something is just how long into the future you'll still be able to do that thing. The key issues that are affecting sustainability are the environmental impact of the organisation or practice, how its operations contribute to climate change and how climate change will impact their operations. Biodiversity loss, so that's the loss of the variety of species and complex ecosystems that make up our natural world. This loss can have significant ecological, societal, social and economic consequences which affect ecosystem stability, food security, and the overall health and well-being of the planet. And another key issue is all the non-environmental issues to do with equity and economic viability. So these are interlinked with the environmental issues, as changes to the environment will affect communities in different ways and impact their ability to support themselves financially. So how does this impact business? Well, here's an example. Imagine a cafe owner. How will climate change impact their business? Researchers have found that the Earth's rising temperatures could reduce the areas suitable for growing coffee by 50%. The result will likely be increased coffee prices as demand continues but supply is reduced. Their costs have gone up, and so they may need to make decisions about increasing menu prices or reducing costs elsewhere to remain profitable and competitive. How about another example? So say you were the CEO of a bank, you might be reviewing whether rising oceans will impact the value of properties by the coastline that your bank has released mortgages on. A lack of sustainability can therefore affect business, but businesses and organisations must also address its own environmental impact as well. An organisation or practice that fails to address its environmental impact can face long-term consequences and damage to ecosystems, threatening its own existence and the well-being of future generations. So, what can we do? Well, let's talk about net zero. Next slide, please, Nora. So you probably heard the term net zero. It's a term that's gained significant attention in recent years, especially when it comes to tackling the urgent issue of climate change. At its core, net zero refers to achieving a balance between the amount of greenhouse gases that we put into the atmosphere and the amount that we remove. And so we therefore need to consider net zero as a global issue. But net zero is also a term that an organisation or country might use to describe their strategy towards it. Indeed, the UK government has a strategy and target for net zero by 2050. Many companies, governments and organisations are setting net zero targets to align with international climate goals, reduce their environmental impacts and create a sustainable future for all of us. So let's imagine a world where we've achieved net zero. In that world, homes are comfortable and draft-free. The idea of a home where the temperature fluctuates constantly with damp or condensation forming is an alien concept. Our homes are well insulated and ventilated. Our heating systems use low or zero carbon energy sources like heat pumps, and they're controlled efficiently. You may share or own an electric vehicle or have an electric battery at home and use electrified public transport. And you might even have a battery to allow you to charge overnight when a glut of wind power sees prices drop. And other sources might be your own solar array, providing free electricity. So a good place to start with this is by measuring your contribution to greenhouse gas emissions, then putting together a net zero action plan so that you can then act to reduce your emissions. A net zero plan or strategy establishes targets for reaching net zero as an organisation and the specific actions to achieve these targets. This gives you clear goals that the whole organisation can work towards. But just setting the targets isn't enough. It's important to make sure that you work towards meeting them and sticking with them once you do. Some examples of actions that your organisation could take are things like adopting cleaner technologies, using renewable energy sources like solar and wind power, improving the energy efficiency of your workplace. You could adopt sustainable practices like reducing food waste, recycling, waste management, and choosing products with lower carbon footprints. You could also achieve and maintain ISO certification, so that stands for the International Organization for Standardization. Certificates include ISO 50001, which is the environmental management, or ISO 50001, which is energy management, and ISO 14061, which provides independent verification on quantification and reporting of greenhouse gas emissions and removals, and lots more. There's lots more things that you can do. Collaborating across your organisation is central to achieving your net zero ambitions. So I'm now going to pass it over to Laura, who will talk about how to take your organisation with you on your journey to net zero.
Super, thank you very much, Lucy. So here we'll kind of discuss some of the ideas about how we can engage our employees to help them in achieving our sustainability goals, or perhaps our net zero goals. And I think it's really important that when we talk about employee engagement, that we're thinking about starting at the very top with senior leadership of the organization, and it's not something just isolated to the sustainability manager within any organization. In a recent report by Energy Saving Trust with Green Alliance, which was commissioned by the Climate Change Committee, we reported on how many companies perceived the Energy Saving Opportunity Scheme audits, so the ESOS regulation, in place to encourage energy efficiency in workplaces, as purely a compliance activity with limited energy saving actions attributed to the programme. A government climate change agreement evaluation found that companies were more likely to take action on energy efficiency as a result of agreements where they had a culture of complying with targets, but also strong board level engagement with energy and very keen energy managers. So as I say, we really do need to start at the top of the organisation, and we need to take our whole organisation along the journey with us for net zero. Could I have the next slide, please? So where do we start? I think we really need to start by explaining the why we are doing this. We need to explain to every member of our staff that they have an important part to play in achieving our organisation's net zero and sustainability goals. We can talk to them about our net zero target, about the scopes. We know that scope 2 for many organisations, you know, the electricity, the energy that we consume within our offices, these are things that these emissions can be highly impacted by the behaviours of the employees who are working in those spaces. So they can have a really positive impact in reducing our scope 2 emissions. But it's important that they understand why this is important to the organisation and to the organisation's net zero goals. We know that with scope 3, when we're talking to which is our supply chain emissions, as many of the organisations on this call today are probably very aware of their scope 3 emissions and are looking at ways of reducing those scope 3 emissions by engaging with suppliers. It's important that those people within the organisations that are engaging with the supply chain understand why they might want to start asking their supply chain questions about their emissions, to understand and work with those suppliers in reducing their emissions and helping bring the organisation closer to their net zero goal. It's much easier if those people within the organisation can see that they are a part of a much bigger picture and the why they are needing to take these actions, and look at the sources of emissions and how they can impact on those positively. Lucy just talked earlier about the upward trend in energy prices that we've seen over the past year or so. And while perhaps we're not where we were a year ago, it's not really abating. I don't think anybody in any company or organisation really wants to see budgets literally being burned in carbon emissions. So I think making that connection between the financial savings that you can be making for the business, money that could be used towards other things in the business and related to your core activities, should be a driver for everybody. We also want to think about what being more sustainable will mean to our customers and to our stakeholders. So if those employees who are engaging especially with customers understand where the company is, what they're doing in terms of net zero, in terms of sustainability, they understand why certain policies are in place, why employees are being engaged, they can share those messages in an authoritative and knowledgeable way with customers and stakeholders. And we're seeing more and more that customers and stakeholders are asking companies and organizations to be more transparent and share information on what they're doing to become more sustainable. I think it's really important as well that we talk about reducing emissions in our own lives. I think for many of us, our favorite place is our home. I think we're all keen to take actions to reduce the emissions coming from our home. And I think if we start at home, those actions and those behavioral changes that we might put in place to save energy in our own home, we can then bring them to the workplace. When we talk to different organizations who are looking at training and employee engagement, we're increasingly seeing that the employees are very interested in also looking at their own home emissions and what they can do to reduce emissions in their home. And I think it makes a lot of sense to make that connection. So there are lots of ways we can think about how we might do this, training being one, the way we communicate messages being another. If we could go to the next slide, please. I'll talk a little bit more about kind of how we can kind of have a bit more of a multiplier effect through training. So obviously we could have training to kind of explain the why to those organizations. If we want to sort of be a little bit more strategic, we could perhaps consider sustainability champions. So these are internal staff within the organization that can help push the agenda with colleagues and are people that other staff can actually ask or provide ideas to. So they have some ownership, they can escalate those ideas to hopefully take those good energy saving suggestions and convert them into action that reduces emissions for the company or the organization. We can also upskill certain members of staff by offering training to become energy advisors with different kind of levels of technical knowledge. And this can be a great way to actually engage customers in topics like energy improvements and behaviours. We see more and more as we want to, especially for those in retail. So for those who are looking to help customers make greener choices, we understand that actually education is going to be a really important part of this. And so if you can have a member of staff that can speak authoritatively and knowledgeably about the reasons why you might want to make certain choices and be more green, I think that can have a much greater impact on the customer and help them make a better decision and perhaps consider purchasing an appliance that is going to reduce their emissions. And then I think also we can set up, I think everybody likes a bit of healthy competition, so sometimes it's very helpful to set goals, perhaps look at different departments, share successes of different departments or different individuals. I think the communication side of this is really important, and if we move on to the next slide, I'll talk a little bit more about that. Okay, so here are some ideas about how we can communicate what we are doing to encourage employees to take it further and to raise their ambitions in terms of energy saving. So we can encourage measuring our energy use at home and at the office. We can look at behaviours that have changed and reduced those emissions, and we can share that internally. We can provide posters, maybe just a visual reminder next to the thermostat. Do you really need to keep pushing it up because you're feeling cold? Is that actually going to have an impact? And I think sometimes those visual reminders can help us make better decisions that are going to actually reduce emissions for our businesses and in our own lives. We can obviously communicate this information through any means, really. Emails, posters, intranet. I think the list is pretty much endless. And it's also really helpful, I think, to share interesting and relatable energy facts just to engage people and provoke thought, and also to provide proof points to some of the training and guidance that you have been providing. I think when we see perhaps we could see that in the average home, space heating makes up over 40% usually of your energy bill. That's quite impactful. That might make you consider changing your behavior. If I take my thermostat down by 1 degree, perhaps I can save £100 a year. When I see it converted into monetary terms and perhaps kilos of carbon, then that can make it more real for me, and it can back up some of the messages that I have been hearing in my workforce through employee engagement. We also need to think seasonally. Obviously, we have different motivators to make changes in our offices and in our homes in the summer and in the winter. I think always trying to keep all of our messages and campaigns as topical as we can is really important to make sure that employees are always engaged with that. Perhaps when there's been an energy price change, you can run a campaign about how to save energy in the workplace. Perhaps when you're having a hot summer, you can share guidance about cooling down and keeping spaces cooler in an efficient and green way. So I think always keeping it seasonal is going to be really important. then, of course, we could always share our successes. I think success often breeds more success. So if we keep sharing those successes of our colleagues, of different departments, I think it encourages people to kind of, again, be that little bit more ambitious, go that little bit further, and make those positive changes. So if you want just for the final slide from me, and as we say, if anyone wants to kind of continue this conversation, I know that Nora has shared a link in the chat where you're more than welcome to fill in a form, and we can take this a bit further, and we'll also be answering any questions that people have in a moment. I'm now going to pass back to Nora, who's going to do our poll and handle our Q&A. Thank you.
Thank you, Laura and Lucy. That was great. I'll just share this slide to let you know about our next webinar, which is taking place on the 21st of November at 11:30 a.m. How does a life cycle assessment impact your business and decarbonization plans? In this webinar, we'll discuss what a life cycle assessment is and how it can be a useful tool to your business. We hope to see you there, and we'll shortly post a link to register in the chat. Next, we will share the 2 short poll questions that we mentioned at the beginning of the webinar, and we'll give you a bit of time to answer these. All right. Thank you for your participation in those. We will now move on to the Q&A section. So we've had a few questions already submitted. So we will first address these. And again, if you'd like to have a more in-depth conversation or get some questions specific to your organization answered, please fill out the form in the chat. We'll share that again. I will stop sharing now. All right. So firstly, we have seen some comments from our audience who wanted to understand about campaigns and inspiring activities, which hopefully we've touched upon today. Although if you'd like further clarification on that, we can continue the conversation offline. And I'll go into one of the first questions we've had submitted already. I think that Lucy would be best suited to answer this. So the question is, what are simple ways to reduce energy use when either working from home or in the office?
Yeah, there's quite a lot you could do. Obviously, we're all a bit kind of in a split workplace situation. A lot of people working from home, but some people are in the office. So there's quite a lot you can do. So if you there's probably 2 main things. So sort of think before you print is one thing to try and remember. So do you really need to print that document? Is it critical? Is there a sort of digital option? If you do need to print, it's just sort of being careful around, does it need to be in color? Can you do black and white? Making sure it's 100% ready before you print, so you don't have to reprint. Trying to print double-sided, all that kind of stuff. The other side of that is maybe more related to your work equipment. So I'm thinking maybe an office, for example. A lot of us have got laptops, so unplugging the laptop when it's fully charged. If you've got it plugged in all day, it's using kind of extra energy unnecessarily. But also switching off plugs and monitors when they're not in use, if you're away for your lunch, or if you're done for the day, just making sure everything's off at the plug. It's all quite simple stuff, but it's trying to kind of think of a lot of things that you can do at home and in the office, so they can apply to both. Hopefully that was helpful.
Thank you. That was very informative. Our second question, I think, Laura, you might be best suited to answer this one. So most of our small workforce are open to saving energy and net zero aims, but how do you persuade the one who isn't?
Okay, so I suppose first of all, it would be good to kind of understand why that person seems a little bit less engaged or less motivated to make changes for energy efficiency. It might be because perhaps they don't understand the urgency of the climate emergency. So training that kind of really covers where we're at and why we really need to act now, it could be valuable. It might actually be almost the other extreme, that I think sometimes it happens to all of us when we think about the climate emergency. You might feel overwhelmed and that you don't know where to start. And I think in those cases, just a call to action, getting people to make even small changes can really empower them to be each time a little bit more ambitious. So I think here that's why it can be valuable to look at energy in your home when you're looking at energy efficiency training, even for the workplace. I think if any of us did some energy efficiency, a good energy efficiency training course today, we could probably all go home this evening and change something in our homes that will reduce the emissions in our homes, and we can do that same day. And I think that's immediately going to make you see that you have a part to play in reducing our energy demand and helping us reach net zero. So I think really trying to inspire even the smallest change, I think that's a really important starting point to empowering people to make bigger changes and to perhaps feel a little less apathetic towards the situation. But again, I think it's important to look at all the different drivers. There might be financial as well, so then you might want to look at the energy prices. They might be competitive. They might want to have a better promotion with customers. You can show how it's mattering more and more in business today to customers, what the companies they're buying from are doing. I think you really want to look at the different kind of motivations or lack of motivation in that individual, and then try to tailor your messaging and your training towards overcoming those. And if you would like to speak about this specific case in a separate conversation, very happy to have that offline.
Perfect. Thank you, Laura. We have a couple more pre-submitted questions, so we'll get through those first, and then I see a few questions in the question box as well. So the next question is, what is the best form of delivering engaging energy-saving training to ensure good attendance and engagement?
Yeah, I can take this one. Yeah, so lots of different forms of training, different ways to learn as well. So they all kind of have different benefits. So for example, getting together in person, that's a great way to engage people. It's a more natural way for people to bounce off each other. It's great for trainers to kind of easily observe who's following, who's engaged, and then you can kind of do something about it if it's needed. If you need to kind of cover something again, or try a different tack. Of course, this isn't always possible. In recent years, of course, a lot of us have moved to being online. There's plenty of video call services, and they've all got kind of different features to try and help you make your training engaging online. So for example, breakout rooms, I think they're a really good way to kind of break out into smaller groups to try and engage with each other, because it can be quite difficult online to try and engage a full group at once. So yeah, it's worth kind of learning, or trying out different features, polls and things like that. E-learning has also become more popular as well. So that's where it's all online again, but learners can take themselves through a module at their own pace. That can really suit a lot of learners. Often you can kind of revisit the module if you need to as well. It's also a good way to reach more learners at once if you've got quite a big workforce. What I would say is I tend to find it quite useful to then follow up any self-learning with like a discussion group. It helps bed in the learnings, allows learners to ask questions, and then you can kind of get a bit of a discussion going about the topic with their colleagues as well. So a mixture of lots of different learning can work quite well as well. But yeah, it does depend on what you need and what your organisation needs.
Perfect. That's really helpful. And that kind of goes into the next question that we had. So can you talk about any other examples of involving the workforce in sustainability?
Yeah, definitely. I think Laura covered quite a lot of examples there, which were great. I suppose the Sustainable Champions is quite a good tack to take, or maybe setting up a sustainability committee or groups, teams, that sort of thing. And they could do lots of other activities. For example, maybe putting together newsletters with tips like what Laura was talking about. Maybe they could write blogs, arrange kind of lunch and learn sessions, so kind of short sessions about a particular topic while people are eating their lunch. They could maybe organise activities as well to kind of get their colleagues involved. So I don't know, maybe litter picks, or even things like learning how to mend clothes. I'm sure we did something like that ourselves. Sharing sustainable recipes, all that kind of stuff. Just trying different things. I think Laura mentioned about maybe having different themes every year, every 6 months or something like that. So that can be quite a good way to just keep it fresh with everyone as well.
Perfect. Thank you. Lots of good ideas there. So that's all of our pre-submitted questions. I'll move on to the ones asked in the question box. I see a couple of questions about receiving a copy of the presentation slides, and we can confirm that the presentation slides and the recording will be sent out to you after the webinar today. So you can have a look at those. Just looking at the other questions we've gotten. So this one talks about would home working be better than office working? So maybe this would have to do with where you can save more energy or how you can communicate with your employees in the best way.
I could jump in on that one. Yeah, unless you have anything to add, Laura. Yeah, so it's hard to say what would be better or not, because I think it does probably depend on maybe the size of your organization or what you do. I think a lot of organizations have moved to online with people working from home, which can be quite useful for say if I don't know, if transport costs and carbon emissions can be heavily reduced by people not traveling into the office. Often it might not always be possible. Some people might not be able to work from home. So yeah, I think it probably depends on maybe what your emissions are now and what maybe you could do to reduce that. And I think that's, again, something that if you wanted to reach out and chat to us about more individually, it might be helpful to kind of work out what might be a better setup for you.
Perfect. Thank you. Another person asks if we have any tips or fact sheets on energy saving in the office, which I think, Laura, you can talk more about, but we do have some resources on our website for employee engagement as well. I'm not sure if Laura and Lucy, you have anything to add there.
Yeah, so I think the Energy Saving Trust website has a lot of really valuable and impartial information that you can share. I think there's a lot of content that you could use as part of your employee engagement that's available online, and we'd be happy to kind of signpost you to some of these materials if that's helpful on a separate call. And then of course you can look at, we spoke about those proof points where you use kind of interesting facts and stats. We also have those available. Energy Saving Trust maintains and updates saving information related to different behavioral changes and appliances, which we update with every energy price change. So you can sort of enrich your messages with those proof points and those bits of data. And then of course, like, you can look at sort of training within your organization, and again, considering all the different formats that Lucy mentioned, and seeing what could be most valuable. I don't know, Lucy, if you want to add anything else there.
I think that's pretty much covered it. Yeah, I would agree with that.
Perfect. Looking at our other questions, we have quite a specific one, but we can make it a bit more general. So someone's asking about giving recommendations to schools which don't have large resources. So if there's any tips for maybe organizations that don't have as large resources. I think, Lucy, you talked a lot about tips that are easier to implement, but maybe if you want to handle that question.
Yeah, I think, I'm not sure if I'm able to kind of specifically talk about schools, but I think a lot of the tips that we talked about, you could maybe adapt things like that. So a lot of the sort of messaging and quick tips and fact sheets and some, sort of engaging visual ways perhaps to involve people, or adapting the idea of the sort of lunch and learn sessions, or the sort of activities. So a lot of those might be quite kind of work for different types of organizations and schools. So the sort of food waste perhaps is maybe a good one to involve people in as well, and recycling and sort of sort of managing that side of things. I think that would probably be a good example for schools, but yeah, some of the other stuff I've mentioned as well would be for most organizations.
And if you want, I can just add, we do have some data and materials that we can share with schools and charities at no cost. So if whoever's put the question in wants to fill in the form, then I can share those after this webinar.
Perfect. Thank you, guys. So we have another question that is about sort of a specific target group. Someone's asked how to engage and get a message across to a large range of ages in their organization. So they've said that their organization has a very wide age range, and if there will be any tips that can engage one over the older members of the organization or younger.
I don't. Do you want to take this, Lucy, or I'm happy to take it?
On you go, Laura. Yeah.
So I mean, I wouldn't want to say necessarily by age, like how you want to kind of split up your training, but maybe, across an organizations, we've got different people with different motivations, preferred ways of accessing training. So maybe you might want to consider a training mix. So maybe for some people, they like a kind of more of an LMS, an online e-learning platform that they can dip in and out of, do a quick 10 minutes here between meetings, go back to a meeting, come back and continue. Maybe they like to have that sort of check their progress against other people. It's a format that they like to work with. Perhaps other people like more of of a workshop where it's all in person, you have a discussion, you engage with the trainer. You might also think that some people, you might have noticed within your organization that some people are driven by prices, like they're quite motivated by reducing costs in the business. Some people might be extremely motivated by helping the organization hit net zero, or reducing some of the emissions that come under some of the scopes that concern them, or some of the emissions that they can see in the business where they want to share that advice. So I think it's really, I don't think you necessarily have to limit the way that you're providing employee engagement to a one size fits all. I think it might be necessary, considering that's an important investment in the people within your organization, and achieving your sustainability goals, that you do have to take we really think that you have to take your whole organization on this journey. You might need to think about how different people would prefer to kind of engage on energy efficiency and saving. I don't know, Lucy, if there's anything you want to add there.
Yeah, I think that's a really good answer. And I suppose just building on what you finished with there, I think it might be useful as an organisation to maybe do a bit of an evaluation activity to kind of find out what people's motivations are, or what their learning styles are, or what, how they best engage. So, maybe a couple of, like a survey initially, just to give you more of an idea as to what your audience looks like, and then kind of adapting it from there. But definitely having a mix of things with training, but also other different styles of engagement. So from kind of written newsletters to workshops to, lots of different things that they can do. I think that's worth kind of, doing a bit of a survey first of all, and then working from there.
Perfect. That's great. Really helpful. Looking at the questions we have coming in, there's one talking about tailoring this to their employees, about encouraging people to transition to things like e-bikes and electric cars as part of their daily commute, and maybe ways that you can encourage that.
I
don't know, Lucy, if you might be best to answer this one.
Yeah, again, it might be worth us having another chat. We do have kind of transport specialists at Energy Saving Trust as well, who can maybe chat a bit more about that. But yeah, again, there's maybe a few different ways, so it's sort of smaller engagement through, kind of learning about the different types of travel. We kind of talk about a travel hierarchy, for example, so trying to encourage people to start, think about how they travel and whether they need to travel or not. So, starting with digital communication to active travel to public transport, all the way down to sort of driving and things like that. So we include that sometimes with our training that we've done internally, for example. We've got a bit of you could put together a bit of a process as to, map out how people help people decide how to travel, if that makes sense, so sort of trying to make them think sustainably. So it's probably more of an education piece in that sense. It might also be that maybe you're able to, there might be employee benefits to, get active travel, purchase bikes, e-bikes, that sort of thing, EV loans, that on all that kind of thing. So again, it would depend on your organisation, but yeah, it could be anything from just education up to support, I guess. Hopefully that sort of answers the question, but happy for our transport colleagues to chat.
Perfect. Yeah, that's very helpful. So I think we might just have time for one more question, just looking at the time now. But someone mentioned that their sound cut out around ISO certification. So I know that you both kind of touched on this. And if you want to maybe just sum up what you mentioned once more before we end today.
Yeah, of course, I can jump in on that. There's a lot of numbers to remember as well. I can never quite remember them myself. Yes, so there was 3 that we mentioned. The first one was ISO 14001, or 14001. That's the environmental management. And then the other one was energy management, which is 50,001. There's so many zeros, I always forget what they are. 50001. That's energy management. And then the other one is 14064-1. In other words, it provides independent verification on quantification and reporting of your greenhouse gas emissions and removals. So those are just 3 there. So you could have a wee look online. Yeah, hopefully that's helpful. I could maybe post them in the chat as well, if that's easier, if anyone wants to note them down. Did you mention about sharing the slides already?
Yes, yeah. We'll share the slides in the recording, so you can refer back to that. Thank you both. I think that's all we have time for today. If we didn't get a chance to answer your questions, please fill out the form in the chat and we can take that outside of the webinar and pick up there with a conversation. And thank you all for your participation today. Have a great rest of the day.
Thank you
Thanks,
very much.
everyone.